She was actually a when we were in the primates. We had just started singing. I think we were like now by that maybe 13 or 14 years old, and Florence was a
sister was a beautiful person. She wanted to live. She wanted to raise her beautiful children, and her life was taken away from her.
Walks up to me and he says, you told me that you wouldn't try to stand in Diana's way if she wanted to be a single artist.
Do you know that the Supremes, once music legends, had some serious backstage drama that was totally different from their glitzy spotlight moments?
It absolutely just took everything out of her. I mean,
there were rumors of everything from affairs to the wild claim that Florence Ballard might have been eliminated by someone from Motown.
I don't know, it caused me to feel more pressure because it was as if they were saying, we're getting ready to put you out now.
Her own sister and a bunch of people close to her in the industry have talked about her untimely death, hinting that she was seriously wronged. Did the label want her spotlight to be snatched away? Why was she forced out of the group? Let's find out. In 2008, Florence Ballard's family stumbled upon 8 hours of taped interviews she recorded shortly before she passed away. In these tapes, Florence talked about being scared for her safety, which made her family start raising eyebrows about all the mysterious circumstances around her death. Her sister Maxine was especially convinced that Florence didn't die naturally and even wanted to have her body exhumed to prove it.
And I have a message to deliver. I have a message to deliver to all of her wonderful fans all over the world. This message will dispel any rumors concerning her life and her death.
Her family was told she had died of coronary artery thrombosis, yet she had no known history of heart disease. Even more puzzling, her toxicology report revealed no alcohol or barbiturates in her system, but there was an unidentified brown cereal-type substance. What was this strange substance, and why was it never identified? Could it be evidence of foul play? Florence's sister, Maxine, has long believed that Florence was off to silence her. She even admitted to privately confronting the man she suspected of being responsible for her sister's death. "I believe my sister was a med. My sister was a victim of domestic violence," Maxine Ballard said. "If you were at the funeral, you would have seen the bruises up and down her legs." Her fans even believe this. One person wrote, "I also believe that she was Emder. She knew more than anyone. At 32, she suddenly dies. She was very underrated. She never got credit. She was the one who got the group together. R.I.P. Flo. One day the truth will come out. But who was this man? And why would anyone want Florence silenced?" Florence Ballard's story takes a darker turn when we consider her tumultuous relationship with her husband, Tommy Chapman. Known to have avid her, Chapman's life ended tragically in 1985, leaving behind questions about his potential involvement in her struggles. In the 8 hours of taped interviews Florence conducted just a year before her death, she opened up about her battles. She told Detroit Free Press journalist Peter Benjaminson that after leaving the Supremes, she took legal action against Motown and its creator Berry Gordy. But what led her to sue the very label that had propelled her to fame? Berry Gordy, a former professional boxer turned record producer, launched Tamla Motown Records with just $800 in 1959. His extraordinary ability to spot talent gave the world iconic acts like the Jackson 5, the Supremes, and Smoky Robinson and the Miracles. He often hyped up some artists while totally dropping others without a second thought. If they didn't impress him, they were out. No questions asked. Florence mentioned in the tape that going up against him was no joke, especially once she kicked off her legal battle. As the mastermind behind a sound that revolutionized music, Gordy built an empire. However, did this success come at the expense of artists like Florence? She might have started feeling scared and she couldn't quite put her finger on why. To get a grip on her fear, let's rewind a bit. Florence was born on June 30th, 1943 in Detroit, and she was the 8th of Jesse and L.Y. Ballard's 13 kids. Music was a big deal for her from the get-go. Her dad, even though he spent most of his time grinding away at the auto factory to support the family, always found the energy to play his guitar and sing. He was Florence's first music teacher, and she loved it. He would play her favorite songs and teach her how to sing them. Those early music lessons really stuck with her, and before long, she was out singing her dad. Florence quickly became known in her neighborhood at the Brewster Housing Project, where her powerful, clear voice wowed the neighbors as she casually belted out the hits from the radio. It was impossible to miss her musical talent. As she got older, she found more opportunities to sing in school music classes and choirs. By her early teens, her career was really starting to take off. Two of her neighbors, Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams, were in a group called the Primes, which later became the Temptations. They put in a good word for her with their manager, Milton Jenkins, who was blown away by her voice. He asked her to perform as a soloist alongside the Primes. After Florence performed with the Primes a few times, Jenkins realized he had discovered something special. Since groups were all the rage in the late 50s, he suggested that Florence start a sister group to the Primes, and he wanted to manage them. Florence was all in and quickly asked her friend Mary Wilson to join. They also brought in Betty McGlown and Mary's friend Diana Ross after getting the okay from their parents. So, in the spring of 1959, the four teens officially became known as the Primettes.
I have standards. You have a way that you want to run your business. I have standards. I have a way that I think works. I request that in my presence.
They dove into rehearsals with Florence as the lead singer, and the girls were super eager to make it work. They dedicated tons of time after school and on weekends to learn songs, rehearse harmonies, and nail down their look. Jenkins was so impressed with how well they were prepared that he pushed to promote them. Before long, the Primettes were performing at record hops, talent shows, and special events. Even though they were a polished act, they often performed for free, which was a bummer. But on the bright side, they gained tons of valuable experience and started building a local fan base. However, it wasn't always smooth sailing. Getting everyone together for rehearsals was a struggle sometimes. If someone had chores at home or their parents thought they were spending too much time singing instead of focusing on school, that could mean less rehearsal time or even missing out entirely until they sorted out their obligations. Then they faced the challenge of replacing Betty McGlown, who left the group. Luckily, they brought in Barbara Martin to fill that gap. The Primettes soon started searching for a record deal. Diana Ross reached out to her former neighbor, Smoky Robinson, who was singing with the Miracles. Thanks to him, she arranged for the Primettes to audition with Gordy at Motown Records. After listening to the eager teens, Gordy told them to come back once they graduated high school. Instead of feeling discouraged, the girls kept their spirits high. They were so fascinated by Motown and its artists that they made it a point to visit the studio whenever they could, practically becoming regulars there. Eventually, they got the chance to perform some simple background parts on recordings, like hand claps, while working on opening doors for themselves at Motown. Meanwhile, they kept their eyes peeled for any other record companies willing to sign them.
Diana Ross she's classy. Diana Ross she would, when the lights come on, Diana Ross comes on.
Luck seemed to be on their side, at least for a moment, when they signed a contract with a small label called Lupin Records. They released two songs, Tears of Sorrow and Pretty Baby, but both ended up being flops. After that, Florence suddenly left the group without any explanation, and Mary and Diana watched everything they had worked for start to slip away.
I have standards. You have a way that you want to run your business. I have standards. I have a way that I think works. I request that in my presence.
What the girls didn't know was that Florence had been hurt by someone she trusted, and that betrayal caused her to completely change. In the summer of 1960, just a few weeks after meeting Gordy, Flo went to a sock hop at Detroit's Greystone Ballroom. She had gone with her brother Billy, but they ended up losing each other in the crowded dance hall. As Florence walked home in the dark, she accepted a ride from a young man she thought she recognized from the newspapers, a local high school basketball player. According to her friends and family, that man was Reggie Harding. Instead of taking her home, he drove her to an empty parking lot north of Detroit off Woodward and Canfield Boulevard, where he ate her at knife point. For weeks after, Florence isolated herself, staying in her room and avoiding everyone, including her confused bandmates. When they finally reached out, she told Mary Wilson and Diana Ross what had happened. While the girls were sympathetic, they were also baffled by how much Florence had changed. She had always been strong, resilient, and full of life, but now she was withdrawn, sullen, and prone to sudden outbursts and arguments with no clear reason.
We were all virgins, and for her to sit there and tell us what had happened to her almost was just too much to bear.
Mary described Flo as a happy, mischievous, and sassy teenager before the incident, but now she was a different person. One thing that never changed, though, Florence never mentioned the A again. Later that year, in 1960, the Primettes signed with Lupin Records and released two songs, but neither made much of an impact.
And to see that something could happen to our friend, and you could see that she was no longer the girl that she was. She was like devoid of whoever she was.
Throughout 1961, the group's relentless pursuit of a Motown contract led them to agree to pretty much anything, including adding hand claps and singing backup on other artists' tracks. By the end of the year, Berry Gordy finally gave in and let them record their own songs in the studio. In early 1961, Gordy agreed to sign them, but with one condition: they had to change their name. Janie Bradford offered a list of options, and Florence Ballard chose the Supremes, even though the other girls weren't thrilled with the new name. Diana Ross, in particular, was worried it might cause confusion with a male vocal group. Regardless, on January 15, 1961, they officially became the Supremes. However, their early days at Motown weren't smooth sailing. The label released 8 singles, none of which made it to the Billboard Hot 100. This earned them the nickname No-Hit Supremes. One of their songs, Buttered Popcorn, led by Florence Ballard, became a regional hit in the Midwest but still didn't chart nationally.
In the Primates, we had just started singing. I think we were like now by that maybe 13 or 14 years old.
In early 1962, Florence briefly filled in for Wanda Young of the Marvelettes, who was on maternity leave. By the time they released their debut album, Meet the Supremes, later that year, Barbara Martin, who had replaced Betty McGlown, left the group, turning them into a trio. Their big break came in 1963 with the song When the Love Light Starts Shining Through His Eyes. After that success, Diana Ross took over as lead singer. In the spring of 1964, the Supremes released Where Did Our Love Go?, which became their first #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100. This success opened the door for 10 more #1 hits between 1964 and 1967, recorded by Ross, Ballard, and Mary Wilson.
Baby, 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 don't leave me.
With their live shows improving after tons of rehearsals with Chea Atkins and Maurice King, the Supremes became a real powerhouse. Florence Ballard even got to showcase her talent by taking lead vocals on several songs, showing off her versatility. But despite all her contributions, Florence started feeling more and more dissatisfied with the direction the group was heading. She blamed Motown for messing with their group dynamic and accused them of giving Diana Ross all the attention.
That if Diana wanted to be a single artist, that you wouldn't stand in her way. So I said, that's exactly what I said.
As the pressure built, Florence struggled, battling depression and eventually turning to alcohol. This led to tension with both Diana and Mary Wilson. Her drinking started to cause bigger problems, like missing performances and recording sessions. Eventually, Berry Gordy had no choice but to replace her on stage with Marlene Barrow from the Andante. Florence initially saw Berry Gordy as a father figure, and for a while, their relationship seemed to reflect that. Gordy acted as a mentor to the Supremes, guiding them through the ups and downs of the music industry. But it didn't take long for things to change. Gordy became romantically interested in Diana Ross, and it was obvious to pretty much everyone both inside and outside of the group. Though their romantic relationship wouldn't fully develop until later, Gordy's favoritism towards Ross was clear from the start. He consistently put her in the spotlight, often at the expense of Florence and Mary Wilson. In fact, Gordy admitted in 1990 that when it came to choosing who would sing lead, Ross was always his top pick, confirming what the other members had long suspected. Berry Gordy didn't shy away from admitting his favoritism toward Diana Ross. In an interview with Rolling Stone, he openly stated, "I made the choices of who sung lead, and my opinion was always that Diana had the magic and Mary, Wilson, didn't. It was perhaps favoritism because Diana was a favorite of mine. But she had the talent to justify that favoritism." He took it a step further in a more direct statement to Playboy, saying, "Everybody knew Diana was my baby." Even after Ross left the Supremes in 1970, their partnership continued, spilling over into the world of film. Gordy was the executive producer of the Billie Holiday biopic Lady Sings the Blues, which starred Ross, and later directed her in Mahogany. It was clear, Gordy was head over heels for Diana Ross. In a 2008 interview with Vanity Fair, Gordy said, "It's very clear why I fell in love with Diana. She was my star, and she came from the bottom up. It was just like heaven working with her because she would surpass anything. She always told me, if you think it, I can do it." And she did. However, not everything went smoothly between them. Gordy candidly shared with Rolling Stone about their first intimate encounter, admitting, "That first night I tried to make love to her and it didn't happen. That was like the most embarrassing thing of my life." He reflected on the complexity of their relationship, saying, "When you think of someone as a princess, the queen of your life, your mind plays tricks on you." Adding a deeply personal touch to their bond, Gordy revealed to Vanity Fair that they had a special nickname for each other, black. He explained, "For black people, bigotry was a fact of life. That's why Diana and I started calling each other black. This was before black is beautiful. I said, a word is a word, and I want black to mean love." It was a private, significant part of their connection that spoke to their shared experience and desire to redefine the term in a positive light. After years of balancing both a personal and professional relationship, Berry Gordy and Diana Ross eventually chose to part ways romantically. However, one person who had long been unhappy with their relationship was Florence Ballard. Florence didn't feel betrayed by the romance itself, but rather by the shift in dynamics within the group she helped create. She saw Gordy pushing Diana to the forefront, elevating her to lead singer, while Florence, one of the original founders of the Supremes, was relegated to a backup role. This left her feeling sidelined and undervalued, essentially erased from the group she had poured her heart into.
So I guess by being controlled, I was supposed to be a puppet on a string, and he was supposed to pull my string, and then I danced to his tune.
Some people believe that this pattern may have been repeated with another artist, Galadas, as well. There's speculation that Gordy, just as he had with Diana, may have shown favoritism or taken steps that led to Galadas feeling similarly overshadowed or pushed aside. Fans also talked about it. One person wrote, "For some reason I never liked Diana Ross. She could sing, but it was just something about her." Anyways, around this time, Florence Ballard began an affair with Tommy Chapman, Berry Gordy's chauffeur, and the two became inseparable. Florence didn't seem to mind the gossip surrounding their relationship, and Chapman eventually became her husband. Meanwhile, things were unraveling for Florence professionally. The search for her replacement started in earnest when she was found drunk in bed just before the group had to leave for a show. It felt like she was spiraling into a place she couldn't escape from. Her appearance began to reflect her struggles. She wore heavy, harsh makeup and kept her sunglasses on constantly, almost like a shield. Her drinking only worsened her emotional issues, which were becoming increasingly visible.
I had me a few drinks, and that's nothing unusual. Mary, Diane, all of us had drinks before we went on stage.
Despite taking some time off when she returned, the old habits resurfaced. For the first time, Florence even drank before going on stage, signaling just how deeply entrenched her issues had become. Florence's struggles reached a breaking point after a lackluster performance that didn't impress Berry Gordy. He stormed backstage, demanding that she be removed from the group. Shortly after, Florence was asked to leave the Supremes. As part of a $160,000 settlement, she was forbidden from mentioning her time with the group. Despite this, things initially seemed to be looking up for her. Florence signed a recording contract with ABC Records and, with the help of her husband, started a management firm. However, she entrusted her money to an attorney, which didn't lead to the financial security she'd hoped for. In November 1968, she gave birth to twin girls, but her career never took off as expected. Her husband, lacking the necessary experience, couldn't properly guide her career. Soon, Florence found herself performing in small bars and grills far from the success she'd known with the Supremes. By 1969, Florence was broke, had gained weight, and was so depressed that she often refused to leave her home. In 1971, she had her third child and tried to fight back by suing Motown, alleging that Diana Ross had secretly and maliciously plotted to oust her from the group. However, the lawsuit was dismissed in 1973, leaving Florence in an even deeper state of despair. Florence Ballard's final years were marked by hardship. She had to pawn her jewelry in a desperate attempt to keep her home, but even that failed, and she ended up moving in with family and relying on social support. In 1974, her struggles became national news, drawing attention from the press. The outpouring of fan mail and invitations to appear on talk shows highlighted how much she was still loved by many. In June 1975, she gave what would be her final concert appearance at a benefit for a black prisoner charged with unaliving a guard who had aided her. Florence received a standing ovation that night, but despite the brief spotlight, it wasn't enough to lift her spirits. Mary Wilson, her former bandmate, tried to reconnect and persuade her to rejoin the group, but Florence seemed to sink deeper into depression. That same year, Florence won a large settlement from a lawsuit, and it looked like things were finally turning around. She bought a new house and a Cadillac, giving the appearance of a fresh start. But tragically, just when it seemed she might be regaining control of her life, Florence passed away on February 21, 1976 from a heart attack caused by a blood clot in her coronary artery.
Florence Ballard's death at such a young age is mysterious, and my initial findings reveal a series of possible reasons for her death.
At Florence Ballard's funeral, Diana Ross's entrance created quite a stir. Her own mother was in attendance, and she reportedly looked very upset by the negative reaction from the public toward her daughter. Despite the tension, Ross joined Florence's family in the front pew, sitting directly beside Florence's husband, Thomas Chapman. At one point, she took his youngest daughter, Lisa, onto her lap. This moment was captured by a photographer, making it one of the few publicly available images from the funeral. In a 2010 interview with Michael Musto of The Village Voice, writer Mark Bago, who attended the service, described Ross's behavior at the ceremony. He recalled that Ross arrived with 2 male bodyguards and let out a dramatic, sobbing scream as she entered the church, nearly fainting in her grief. Her entrance was as emotional as it was controversial. Before Ballard's tragic death in 1976, the departure of the songwriting and production team Holland Dozier Holland from Motown in early 1968, due to disputes over royalties and profit sharing, had a significant impact on the label. This shift affected the quality of Motown's releases, including those by Diana Ross and the Supremes, as the hit-making formula the trio once relied on began to falter. This decline coincided with changes in the group dynamic and Ballard's eventual exit from the Supremes, further exacerbating the tensions within the band. As the group's fame grew, Diana Ross began using different tactics to carve out her own identity within the Supremes. Mary Wilson claimed that Ross would switch up her costumes to stand out from her and Florence Ballard during TV performances. Ross allegedly positioned herself farther away from her bandmates on stage, ensuring the camera would focus on her solo. This apparent hunger for the spotlight didn't sit well with the others. Her relentless quest for attention came off as almost ruthless, and it created a rift within the group.